It is sometimes reported by alien contactees that they receive telepathic messages from extraterrestrials. Sometimes these messages occur after meeting them, but from time to time, individuals can begin receiving thoughts much sooner. In this episode, we will examine a controversial case that happened in New Mexico in the 1960s. The man alleges that he began receiving telepathic communication since the age of 5. Now a grown man, he was pulled toward a location and met extraterrestrials. Even more intriguing, the man was summoned so that he could photograph the being's UFO. In this episode, we will dive into this unbelievable story, a case that has come to be known as the Paul Villa contact case. On June 16, 1963, a New Mexico car mechanic named Paul Villa received telepathic communication to drive to a specified location for the purpose of photographing a UFO. The telepathic communication wasn't entirely new for Paul, as he had received messages on and off for years, and also had even met ETs before. That day though, the beings communicated for him to come alone, and this day would be different, as Paul would be permitted to photograph the UFO. Paul hopped in his pickup truck, and when he arrived, he would spot a classic silver UFO, which he estimated to be around 70 feet in diameter. As he got closer, the craft hovered toward the ground, and 9 beings exited through the door. The beings looked human, except they were extremely tall, being somewhere between 7 to 9 feet in height. They had hair colors of copper, blonde, and black, and they were also both males and females. As Paul approached, the beings would telepathically communicate to him that they came from the galaxy of Coma Berenices, which was light years away. The beings stated that they knew many languages and that the craft they exited was their mothership. They went on to say that smaller craft, 14 inches in diameter, were dispersed around the Earth. The smaller UFOs were reconnaissance crafts which fed information to the mothership. Next, the beings told Paul it was okay if he took photos of their craft. For the photos, the UFO hovered up some in the air. Paul had brought his Japanese-made Rokosha camera with a 75mm lens loaded with 120 Kodak film. He took various photos of the craft from multiple angles and even attempted to have trees to provide scale. That day, Paul would take several photos, including the craft on its side, which he stated showed they could manipulate gravity. We will discuss the photos and the legitimacy later in the video, but first it's important to dive into Paul's other contacts with the beings. From 1958 to 1963, Paul stated he had at least 5 UFO sightings. Even more interesting, in 1953, Paul would have his first face-to-face meeting with the entities. At the time, Paul was working for the Department of Water and Power in Los Angeles. One day while working on Long Beach, he had a strong desire to walk toward the beach. It was a strange feeling for Paul, and he didn't understand why he was being pulled toward it. Regardless, he walked there, and when he arrived, he would be greeted by a 7-foot-tall man. Paul was pretty scared initially, and thought about running away, but the man called him by name and began telling Paul personal things about himself only Paul knew. Paul knew pretty quickly this wasn't a human and that it was an ET. The being then pointed toward the ocean, and there, Paul would see a UFO hovering. The alien would explain to Paul that his kind were human-like, however, they were better looking. In addition, as Paul had speculated, they were much more intelligent than humans, and their technology was far more advanced. The being would go on to state that in the galaxy, Earth was a tiny speck, like a grain of sand on the beach. There was a number of galaxies, and a countless number of inhabited planets in these galaxies with advanced life. In addition, they would state that they were able to avoid radar detection. The being would state they have bases on the moon, and also bases on the moons of Mars as well. While Paul's encounter, if true, were without question incredible, he would allege to have another encounter and get more photographs of the craft. On Easter Sunday, April 18th, 1965, Paul was telepathically guided to Bernalillo, New Mexico, which is around 15 miles north of Albuquerque. That day, Paul would get even more photographs of the craft, which he believed to be around 100 feet. The craft came toward the ground, and 3 legs landed on it. He would state 3 beings exited the craft, and he communicated with them for around 2 hours. While the above counters are pretty incredible if true, they are just several of many that Paul would have. According to Paul, he would have many more in his life and take at least 50 photos of their crafts. Despite this, Paul's stories and photographic evidence have been critiqued even by individuals in UFO circles. For instance, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization would analyze the photos and suggest that they might be fakes. What can we make of Paul's photos and his encounters? Unfortunately, it is our opinion the photos are fakes, which discredits his story. To use an example, in this photo, Paul alleges that a UFO is off to the right hovering. However, it's easy to see that underneath the craft, there's an orange reflection coming from his car, meaning Paul must have suspended the object he used over his vehicle to give it the illusion that it was far away. Similar discrepancies can be found in some of his other photos as well. Since we do have limited knowledge of photography and photo analysis, please let us know if there's other discrepancies in any of the photos you see in this video. While it's surely possible that Paul had these encounters, it seems more likely than not he didn't. Although the beings were strange and different from typical Nordics or Greys, the story in of itself doesn't align with many other encounters. For example, there are no stories we can recall off the top of our head in which these beings allow their craft, or UFO, to be photographed. In most cases, UFOs are only seen in desolate areas or the nighttime. In addition, they are sometimes camouflaged in the sky. Paul's story also raises questions around why the beings didn't engage more people if they truly wanted to get photos out to the public of their craft. Despite the fact that Paul's story probably is not true, it's important to point out that there is an incredible amount of evidence supporting the theory that UFOs and extraterrestrials are visiting us and have been for a very long time. In addition to this, there is good reason to believe many of these close encounters of the third and fourth kind reported by people are true. In time, we might learn what these ETs want and get our questions answered, but for now, the best we can do is speculate.